Hi, this is James and I'd like to welcome you to this video. This video is intended for those of you who have expressed interest in seeing me work with the Gypsy Witch playing cards more, or that you have specifically asked about how I work with them in my own personal use, study, and practice. In my last Oracle Outlook video reading, I talked about the idea in terms of deck selection, and I used the Gypsy Witch cards in that video, and I had talked about that I had a dream that morning, and in the dream someone came to me and asked if I would specifically work with the Gypsy Witch playing cards for a reading. So I woke up from the dream and took that as a sign that that was the deck I was supposed to use for that reading. And if you haven't seen the reading yet, I will post a link to it in the video description box below. But that prompted some further thought about it. Once the reading was done and posted to the channel, I thought, is there something more about that dream that I might need to know? Because that was the only thing I really remembered about the dream. I didn't remember if I had did the reading. I didn't remember what cards came up in the reading. I just remembered that someone had asked me to work with the deck. So what I did was I went right to the source, and so I did a reading with the Gypsy Witch cards themselves, asking about the dream and what I needed to know in relation to my use and work with the Gypsy Witch cards. So in the following segments, you're going to see the specific reading I did, and in my journal, it was dated June the 9th, so that's when I did the reading, and I did it on the same day that I actually posted that video, so that was June the 9th. So you'll see how I work with the cards, and what I'm doing is I'm just sharing this to give those of you who work with the deck some ideas about how you might want to approach it. Because one of the beautiful things, but it's also a challenging thing about the deck itself, is that there's no written material or resource on the best ways to read with the deck. So you're kind of like, if you're going to want to work with it, aside from the information that's in the pamphlet, you kind of have to create your own way. Now, the beautiful thing about that is that there's no one looking over your shoulder telling you that you're not following tradition or you're not following the framework or the structure in terms of like working with the deck and reading with it. That's a beautiful thing. At least I think it's a beautiful thing. But it could also be challenging for those who are steeped in tradition or like some kind of framework or structure. And it may be too loose for you in that regard. So that could be a challenge. So again, this is just offering some insights or some ideas, food for thought, about things that you might want to try as you feel your way through working with the deck to find your own way, right? I'm just offering the way that works best for me. I am not in any way claiming to be an authority or an expert on the Gypsy Witch cards. Anytime that I share a video like this, it's just with the intention of offering the way that works best for me, in the hopes that will either resonate with you or prompt you to kind of think about ways that might work best for you. So now that I've talked about that, I'm going to move into the next segment and show you how I personally work with the Gypsy Witch cards, specifically in relation to this specific question. And here we are with the 3 cards that I pulled for this personal reading that I have been talking about in the intro. And so the question that I posed to the cards as a result of having that dream where someone had asked me to do a reading with the Gypsy Witch cards specifically, and that prompted me to use the deck for this most recent Oracle Outlook video reading. But after that, like I said, I gave it some thought and wanted to know if there was some other additional message from the dream about this deck in particular that I might need to know, since I didn't remember anything more than a person asking me to do a reading with the deck. So the specific question I put to the cards was, what do I need to know about the dream regarding my use and work with the Gypsy Witch card? So that was the question I posed to the cards. And so just as I do in my Oracle Outlook video readings, I shuffle the deck, I cut the cards, I fan them out, and I pick whatever number of cards I'm going to use for that reading, and I keep them face down until all the cards have been picked and set up in whatever the pattern or formation of the reading is going to be. So I did that, and then what I normally do after I have selected my cards, I turn them all over at the same time so I can get a general overview of the entire reading. So I'm going to run through it just as if you were with me and I was doing either a personal reading or a daily draw. So this is how I go about it. So turning the cards over from left to right. The first card we have here is the Seven of Diamonds. This is also known as Flames on the Hearth. The middle card is the Four of Diamonds, and this is Dog. And then the final card is the Four of Clubs, and this is Key. So these were the cards that made up my reading. And so once I flip them all over and I look at them, what I first do is I look for any patterns. So the first thing that jumped out at me in this particular reading is that we have two cards from the suit of diamonds, because my approach to the Gypsy Witch cards is I tend to read the playing card insert first, and then I look to the symbol for more information or insight. So looking at the two playing cards from the suit of diamonds, for me, that's ruling majority. So as a ruling majority, I started thinking about some of the possibilities I have for the suit of diamonds in terms of the context for the question. And so for me, one of the meanings that I have for the suit of diamonds is it represent material resources. So I went with that because the context, the question was about the use of Gypsy Witch cards. And in that regard, then the Gypsy Witch card is a material resource or a tool that I'm using to gain information or guidance. So I went with that. And not only that, but the diamonds is also a suit that represents something that has a sense of worth or value, or that it is a rewarding experience. So those are all my associations for the suit of diamonds, and that went into this reading. And then the next thing that I noticed is that we have a repeating number. We have the Four of Diamonds and the Four of Clubs. So 4 is a repeating number. And for me, the 4 can represent foundation. So it's letting me know that a foundation possibly is being laid in terms of my use and work with the Gypsy Witch cards. Along with that, I also thought with the 4 for me can represent framework or structure. And it's very interesting in this context because the Gypsy Witch cards really doesn't have any kind of set structure or formalized structure, right? Aside from the pamphlet that comes in the box with the deck, it really just tells you how to read with the cards if you choose to use the 2 readings that are in the pamphlet. But what if you don't? You know, and how would you work with the cards then? It's not like Lenormand where there is a formal tradition or a formal structure to the deck and a way to read it. The Gypsy Witch cards is a unique system in and of itself because it doesn't carry any set kind of structure. So that's the beautiful thing about it, because no one can tell you that you're reading the cards wrong or that you're reading them not in alignment with its tradition, because it really doesn't have a tradition, right? And that could also be the challenge and the rub for some people who may like having a sense of structure or a sense of order in terms of how to read with a particular system. So there was that to consider. So in this particular case, I took it to mean, like, in my use and study of the Gypsy Witch cards, I get to create my own framework, my own structure. And then the other thing with the number 4 is that 4 is a number that represents discipline for me. So this could also be about, you know, either needing to be disciplined or having a sense of discipline, and discipline could involve training, you know, training myself a particular way to read the cards. So that was my take on the repetition of the suit of diamonds and the number 4. And so once I do the overview, then I start looking at the individual cards. So starting with the card on the left, my first card is the Seven of Diamonds. So for me, one of my meanings for the Seven of Diamonds is this idea of investment, because it can represent, typically, it can represent a lot of money, and it could represent, you know, investments, stocks, bonds, things of that nature. If the context is not about money in the literal sense, then I tend to go with the idea about making an investment of your time, your energy, and your resources into a particular endeavor. And so that is what I went with in this particular case. And not only is it about, you know, making an investment or putting in an investment, it's also about getting a return on your investment. So in that regard, the Seven of Diamonds made me feel like the return on my investment would be well worth it. Again, going with the idea that diamonds is about worth and value. So that's how I looked at the first card, the Seven of Diamonds. Now looking to the flames on the hearth for maybe more information, the first thing that came to me, because it's fire, is I looked at the idea about the element of fire, fire itself. And with that, I tend to think of fire as passion. So that was my take on the idea about the flames on the hearth. There's a sense of passion being burned for this deck, either the deck for me or me for the deck, because of the dream and my being prompted to want to explore more about that. Now, going with the idea that flames could also be about fiery energy, I went with that because another meaning of the suit of diamonds for me is energy. So I looked at that and I came up with this idea about spiritual energy, because the number 7 for me represents spirituality. So it's saying too, like, there's something of a spiritual component to my question, and the fact that the request to work with the Gypsy Witch cards came up in a dream. So there's spiritual energy. And then also too, there's value, going with the idea of diamonds, on a spiritual level about working with the Gypsy Witch cards. So that is how I looked at the 7 of diamonds and the flames on the hearth. And so now let's move on to the next card. So then I went to the 4 of diamonds. And so the 4 of diamonds for me is the card that can represent saving, and saving for the future. Again, because diamonds can represent money, and I usually look at it as, you know, a financial account, a bank account, savings account, things of that nature. And the 4 represents a box. So it usually represents storing money or putting money in some kind of box or container, right? So again, this question wasn't rooted in money in the literal sense. So I had to consider, what other possibilities do I have for the 4 of diamonds that might fit the context? And so I realized, again, going with the number 4 in itself, is that this represents a foundation, and then the suit of diamonds for me represents the element of earth, and so that makes it solid. So I looked at this as, you know, this idea about a solid foundation being formed, right? And also too, the value of structure and discipline, right? And I talked about this idea about discipline with the repeating 4s, so I brought that back in. And then once I came up with the idea about discipline, then the thought came into my head, this phrase: discipline is its own reward, right? So that is how I looked at the 4 of diamonds. But then a lot of information came from the symbol on the card, which is dog. And so going with my meanings for dog, I tend to look at dog as a partner, a companion, or a guide. And so in this case, because the middle card for me always represents the central issue, what we're being asked to focus on, or what's at the heart of the matter, in this particular case, what's at the heart of my question, the symbol of the dog represents the deck itself. It wants to be a partner. It wants to be a companion. It wants to be a guide to me, right? So for me, that was very significant. And then some of my other meanings for dog is that dog can represent help, it can represent support, and it can represent assistance. So with that in mind, as my partner, as my companion, as my guide, the deck wants to help me, it wants to support me, and it wants to assist me, right? So I came up with that. And then the last thing that I came up with dog is that dog for me can represent someone that's trustworthy and loyal. So the deck itself is saying it wants me to trust it. It wants to be trustworthy, and it wants to be loyal to me. So I thought that was very interesting. So the dog card had a lot to say. So that is how I looked at the 4 of diamonds and dog. And so now I'm making my way to the last card. And so now we have the 4 of clubs as the insert. And for me, this card can represent a room, because I tend to look at the 4 of clubs as 4 walls, going with the number 4. So this could be a room, because again, the 4 walls. But not in the literal sense. I went more with the metaphorical sense in this regard. I went with the idea about making room or space for working with the deck, because the clubs can represent work or business in the future. So again, that was making room or space for working with the deck in the future, right? And again, the 4 of clubs in particular is a card that can represent forming or laying a foundation. So that is being repeated. And the foundation is being formed or being laid to build on in the future. So the deck is really urging me to work with it now and we are progressing, or we're going to be building on something that's going to become more productive in the future, because the suit of clubs is also about progress being made. And then we come to the key. And so key is a symbol for me that can represent discovery, revelation. It could also represent an answer or solution. It's also a card for me that's truth. It represents truth. And it's also my yes card. So again, this symbol is saying that the answer to my question is very important, and it's very vital, and it's a yes. So if I was thinking about, like, oh, I wonder if the dream was trying to tell me I need to work with the Gypsy Witch cards more, then this is a definite yes, because it's my yes card, right? So there is that. And now if we pair the dog and the key, we have here an important friend, partner, companion, or guide, because again, dog represents the friend, partner, companion, and guide, and key represents things that are important. So again, the deck is reinforcing its possible importance in my life in the future. So there is that. Now, another possibility, going along with some of the things that I've already said about dog and key, is that the pairing can also represent help and or assistance, that would be dog, in discovering and revealing answers and solutions, and that would be key. So again, this could be help and or assistance in discovering, revealing answers and solutions. And then what I did was I paired the outer cards. We call that mirroring. So we have flames and key, and as a message, this is saying passion is important, passion is discovered, passion is revealed, and passion is key. So that is how I looked at the cards initially. And so now what I'll do is I'll show you some other little techniques that I do, or that I work with when I work with this particular deck. And in this segment, I just want to share some other techniques that I put to work when I'm working with playing cards or the Gypsy Witch cards. So this is called the influences technique, and what you do is you take the playing card inserts, and you want to begin by adding the numerical values of the first two cards. So in this particular case, we have a 7 and we have a 4. And 7 and 4 adds to 11. And so the 11 is a number that is associated with the jack. If we keep it with the playing cards in cartomancy, the jack is valued at 11. So going with that, the jack symbolically for me represents news and messages. And it's also playing the role of the messenger. So that is another layer or nuance that we could add to this reading. So the Gypsy Witch cards are saying, based on the number 11, that it is a messenger because it provides news and it provides messages, which it does. Now if I go with using what I know from numerology about the 11, then the 11 is also about spirituality. It's also about intuition, or using your psychic ability. And for me, the 11 is also a number that represents key, and we have the key card here, so that's interesting to see that show up in another way. But 11 is also the number of light. So what it is it wants to shed light on all my questions through the course of using it for readings. So I thought that was very interesting. And then the 11 being a double digit, in numerology we call it a master number, but it's a double digit number. So then what we can do is we can take that and reduce it to 2. If we take 1 and 1, it reduces to 2. 2 is a number that represents partnerships and relationships. So there we have another layer in addition to all the other information that's been provided. So it's very interesting because on that level, or in that sense, this is about a relationship or a partnership between me and the Gypsy Witch cards, right? And 2, when it's an influence, is also the number of compatibility. So really what it is an underlying question that's not been voiced or spoken, is this idea about, will we be compatible? And so that's what the number 2 is about in terms of energy. And so then moving forward, what we can do is then we could look at the numerical influences of the other 2 cards. So we take the 4 and the 4, and we add them together and we have 8. So 8 is a number for me that can represent power, and it's also a number that is about success, right? So here we have this idea about the relationship being compatible, and it leads to success if we take the 11 and the 8, you know, and we combine them for another message. So there is that as well. And then the 8 is interesting because it's a number that's also equated or associated with business, organizations, and one's career. And it's very interesting because here we have the line ending with a clubs card, and clubs as a suit also rules work and business. So there's an aspect of maybe the deck and I doing business together down the line. So that's another possibility. Then the last thing we can do with the numbers is that we can take all the numbers and add them across. So we have a 7, we have a 4, that's 11, plus 4 is 15. So that's a double-digit number. What we want to do is we want to take that number and reduce it. So 1 and 5 is 6. So 6 is what we call the numerical theme of the entire reading. And so the 6 for me is a number that represents as a theme, it represents responsibility versus reward. And really what it is that the underlying question with a 6 is, what's in it for me? And that comes very back to the first card here, the 7 of diamonds, with about investment and getting a return on one's investment. So that's another way to see that repeated. Another thing we can do is we can take a look at the suits, because the suits will tell us a story in terms of its progression. So if we go with the idea that diamonds and diamonds, just like we did with the numbers, diamonds and diamonds represents improved success. So it's saying to, like, the more that I invest my time and energy into working with the deck, the more successful I will get in terms of the news or messages and the readings that I do with it. So that combination represents improved success. And then we have a diamond and a club, right? And so now we have reward going with the diamonds that comes with work or effort, and that would be the clubs, right? So here we have success and we have progress being made. Very interesting to see. So that is just another way of adding another layer of meaning or nuance to the initial reading that I did. So now I'm going to show you one more technique in the next segment that I do with the numbers of the Gypsy Witch cards themselves. All right, in this segment I'm going to show you my last technique that I use when I work with the Gypsy Witch cards in particular, and I call this finding the essence card. So in the previous segment we worked through the playing card inserts, right? And then now this segment, what we're going to do is we're going to take the numerical values of the individual cards. So for instance, the Flames on the Hearth, the 7 of diamonds, is card number 38. The 4 of diamonds and dog is card number 27. And the 4 of clubs and key is number 4. So what we do is we just take the numbers and we add them across. So we're going to take 38 plus 27 plus 4. And the total on that is 69. Okay, since there are 52 cards in the deck, what you want to do is a number over 52, you want to take that and you want to reduce that by adding the digits together. So since we have 69, 6 plus 9 is 15. And then what I do is I go through the deck and I look for the card that matches that number. So I go through the deck and I look for the 15th card in the deck. And in this particular case, the 15th card is, and I'll move this down, I want to make sure that's in the shot. So here we have, as the 15th card, we have the King of Diamonds and we have the letter. So I do the same thing with this card as I've done with all the previous cards in the initial reading, if I can say that, in the initial reading. And I start with the King of Diamonds because that's a playing card. So the King of Diamonds is a face card, so it can represent a person. So in this particular case, the King of Diamonds could represent me in this regard. One of my meanings for the King of Diamonds is that it can turn up to represent starting a business or running a business. And so as a cartomancer, I am self-employed. That is my business. So in that aspect, he represents me. Symbolically, kings can represent mastery. So if I go with the idea that the suit of diamonds represent a resource, and we already touched on that with the repeating symbolism, the ruling majority of the diamond cards, right? So we have this idea about a resource here, and then the King of Diamonds could symbolically represent mastery of a resource. And again, that would be mastery of the Gypsy Witch cards themselves. So that was my takeaway for the King of Diamonds. Now, letter is a symbol that can represent news or messages, but it's usually in the form of writing. This is a written correspondence card. So for me, I took that into account. So again, this idea about receiving news or messages through the cards. And if we go with the idea that we're talking about paper, then the cards themselves are really laminated pieces of paper, right? So that could be a play on individual cards themselves, that kind of thing, or cards as a collective if they have a unifying message. So there could be that. But for me, I took that as documentation because I tend to look at the letter as paperwork and documents or documentation. So it could just be documentation of reading. So if I'm going to work with the Gypsy Witch cards, if I'm going to use them, it's in my best interest to document my readings, which I do. I keep a journal. I write down every reading that I do by hand. So, and I've been doing that for 20 years now because that's how long I've been reading cards. So. But I also took that to mean, going with the King of Diamonds again about being value, then this could be valuable message, the card that hold, valuable messages that are concise, because the letter is, unlike the book card, right, it's more concise in terms of its news, message, or information. It's concise and to the point, right? So that's how I looked at that, about news and messages that are valuable but are also concise. And then I looked at the card, and it reminded me, because of the context, the question was about the dream that I had, in which someone had asked me to work with the Gypsy Witch cards for a reading. It reminded me of a quote from the Talmud. And the quote is, "A dream that is not interpreted is like a letter unopened." And that was how I concluded this reading. So on that note, I will go ahead and close this video. I hope for those of you who have expressed interest in seeing me work with the Gypsy cards more, or that you are embarking on working with them and maybe you are kind of trying to find your way. With that, I hope that this video has kind of given you some ideas as to what might work for you in your own personal use and study with the Gypsy Witch cards. So I'm James Himm Mitchell, and as I close, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this video, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day, and take care.